Welcome to GDs, and this is The Last Kingdom, Season 5, Part 1. Season starts several years later, and we find that Uhtred is now the Lord of Rumcofa, and he protects the border between Mercia and Northumbria. In addition, we also get to see Aethelstan, son of King Edward, who is now grown up, and Uhtred trained him to be a warrior. Aethelstan, in order to prove he is ready, goes for a hunt. As he hunts, he is attacked by 3 men. Aethelstan is able to fight them off, and he kills 2 of them, while the third gets away. We learn that the men were sent by his grandfather, as he doesn't want the throne of Wessex to be challenged by anyone. In Rumcofa, we also get to see Uhtred's men prospering, and having families. Edith also visits Rumcofa, and we learn that she has been to Francia, and has been practicing medicine. Rumcofa is also preparing for the Red Month festival, and we see Queen Aethelflaed being accompanied by her daughter Aethelflaed, and a recovered Lady Aelswith, traveling towards Rumcofa to join the same. On the other hand, we also get to see Sigtryggr and his wife Stiora ruling in Eoferwic. They have been able to maintain the peace with Mercia and Wessex. Sigtryggr also allowed the priests to preach about their god to his people, though Stiora is not comfortable with his decision. Sigtryggr gets a visit from his brother Rognvaldr, who they thought was lost at sea. Stiora doesn't like him, as he is always there when he is in trouble, or he needs something. But this time, he assures his brother that he has changed. Although he asks him to allow his men to come there, as they have been accused of looting, and he wants to prove their innocence among his people. Sigtryggr agrees for the same, and asks his men to get Rognvaldr's men in town. We also get to see Brida, and we learn that she has become a leader, and is followed by a fanatical band of Danish warriors, who are driven by their gods. While Brida's daughter Vibeke is a seer. And after giving a sacrifice, Brida departs from Iceland, as she seeks revenge. Back in Rumcofa, Aethelflaed finally arrives, and she tells Uhtred that she wants Father Benedict to find a place for himself there. But in reality, she was there to meet Edith, so that she could treat her ailment. As Edith examines Aethelflaed, she lets her know that her disease has spread, and has no viable cure. She lets her know that she has limited time, and she won't be able to see the next spring. Aethelflaed, knowing this, asks her to keep the information to herself, as the succession of Mercia is not yet finalized, and if the news of her health gets out, there might be a lot of turmoil in the kingdom. Later, as the town celebrates, we see an injured young Uhtred reaching there. We find that he was castrated, and he tells Uhtred that it was Brida who did this to him. While in Eoferwic, Rognvaldr tells his brother that this time when he almost died, he was saved by some people, and with them, he was able to connect with their gods. And as Sigtryggr allows his men to enter, he finds that they were indeed Brida's men, and she attacks them. Sigtryggr, not being prepared, is defeated, with many of his people being killed and locked up. Stiora wants to join her husband in order to fight, but her help, knowing the odds, asks her to hide and survive for now. Brida is able to get Sigtryggr to surrender by threatening the life of the innocents. She lets everyone know that she is there to connect them with their gods. She also tells Sigtryggr that she will find his wife, and can spare her life, only if he returns there with Uhtred. Stiora, hiding with her help in the old Roman sewers, watches Brida as she tortures and sacrifices the women of the town. Meanwhile in Rumcofa, as young Uhtred is cared for, Uhtred and his men stand guard, expecting an attack from Brida. But his men are not able to find any sign of Brida around the town. It is when Aethelhelm informs him that Brida has attacked and taken over Eoferwic. Knowing this, Uhtred plans to head to Eoferwic in order to confront Brida and save his daughter. He asks Aethelflaed to provide him with her men, so that he can free Eoferwic. But Aethelflaed, knowing that she will need men in Mercia in order to stop any uprising, as she has limited time, denies giving men to Uhtred. She doesn't give Uhtred a reason for denying him men, as knowing about her health will only distract him. But Uhtred, not knowing the reason, feels betrayed. Edith, seeing this, tells Finan about Aethelflaed's health, and asks him to tell Uhtred the same, once they have won, so that he can see Aethelflaed, as she might not be there for long. Uhtred departs for Eoferwic, and sends his men to the neighboring villages, so that they could get men from there to join him in the battle. We also get to see King Edward in Winchester, and we learn that he has grown distant from his wife, as well as his father-in-law. While Father Peerlig is now one of his close advisors. Edward gets quite fascinated with the Lady Eoferwic of Kent, who was there to see him in his courtroom, in order to get her stolen land returned. Edward, remembering her from his childhood, asks her to stay back. Lord Aethelhelm, finding himself distant from the king, and getting to know about Brida's attack on Eoferwic, wants the king to send his men there, without Mercian's assistance, hoping that this will foment a war between them, and then the king will have to depend on him for coins. But Edward, knowing that this will cause a rift in his alliance, decides against it. He instead sends his men to Mercia, so that they can assist Uhtred as per Aethelflaed's directions. He also asks Father Pearlig to go to Eoferwic, in order to keep an eye on things. Lord Aethelhelm, not being successful in upsetting peace, comes up with a new plan, and sends his men to the neighboring villages of Eoferwic, ordering them in the name of the king, that they are not to assist Uhtred. Uhtred, on his way, meets up with Sigtryggr and Father Pearlig. Sigtryggr learns that Uhtred only has a handful of men with him. They also get to know that King Edward has denied men from the neighboring villages to help him. Sigtryggr feels betrayed by his Saxon alliance, despite Father Pearlig telling him otherwise. Sigtryggr tells Uhtred that he still has men inside, who are loyal to him and will fight for him. In addition, he has a way of getting them inside the walls. And we see Sigtryggr, along with Uhtred and his men, entering the town via the Roman tunnels. Meanwhile Stiora, in order to save the life of her people, confronts Brida, and demands a trial by combat with her. As the Danes make the square, and the two of them face off, Sigtryggr, along with Uhtred and his men, enter the city, and they free his captive men. With his men being free, they attack Brida, and are also assisted by the soldiers of Wessex, who came there with Father Pearlig. As they fight, Brida's daughter Vibeke climbs a tower. Brida, despite knowing the risks, asks her daughter to jump towards her, rather than going towards Uhtred. And as she jumps, she is not able to make it, and she dies. Brida and her men are defeated. But a broken Brida is able to escape, along with a few of her men, and they have also captured Father Pearlig during their escape. While Rognvaldr, seeing the tide of battle turn, attempts to gain favor with his brother, but he is captured and imprisoned. Although Sigtryggr won, he feels quite defeated, as he was betrayed by his own brother. In addition, he is also concerned, as Saxons abandon their truce, by not helping him retake the town. Stiora, knowing how lonely his husband feels, asks her father to stay there for some time. In addition, she also wants him to take care of Brida. Uhtred is intent on tracking down Brida, but having saved his daughter, Finan tells him about Aethelflaed's health. And getting to know the same, Uhtred decides to return back. Lady Aelswith, hoping for a miracle, asks Father Benedict to bless her daughter, as they make their way back to Aylesbury. Father Benedict, being in debt to Lord Aethelhelm, seeks more time to repay him. And in order to get more time, he informs Lord Aethelhelm's men about the health of Queen Aethelflaed. Lord Aethelhelm, getting to know this, knows that the queen is hiding this information, in order to secure a successor for Mercia. And he comes up with his own plan. He wants his grandson to be named the King of Mercia. And in order to achieve the same, he decides to bribe the aldermen of Mercia, so that when the time comes, they choose his grandson as their king. Lady Eoferwic was able to overhear him planning for the same, and she informs King Edward about what she heard. Edward, getting to know this, decides to go to Aylesbury with Lady Eoferwic. Lord Aethelhelm, along with King's younger son Aethelflaed, also join him, not aware that the king knows about his plan. In Aylesbury, Aethelflaed tells her daughter that she has limited time, and now she will be the ruler of Mercia after her. She assures her daughter that she is capable enough to rule, and will have the guidance of Aethelhelm. Uhtred reaches Aylesbury in order to see Aethelflaed. He accompanies Aethelflaed, as she generously donates her land to one of the aldermen, hoping that he will make sure that her wishes for her successor are honored. Aethelflaed, knowing her time to be near, spends time with Uhtred, and asks him to take care of her daughter. And she passes away in Uhtred's arms, watching the sunset. Edward also reaches Aylesbury, but by the time he got there, Aethelflaed was gone. But he gets to interact with his elder son Athelstan. Later, the death of Lady Aethelflaed is announced. And the aldermen of Mercia are summoned to choose the next successor. But on their way, they all are murdered, and we learn that it was King Edward who ordered the same, knowing that his father-in-law bribed them in order to secure a decision favoring him. King Edward, getting rid of all the aldermen, goes against her sister's wishes, and instead of crowning her niece, he proclaims the title of King of Mercia for himself, thereby bringing his father's vision of one England, and one king closer. Lady Aelswith, knowing that this shift in power will put Aethelflaed in danger, decides to leave Aylesbury. Athelstan confronts his father about the bloodshed, but Edward lets him know that sometimes a few must die in order to save many. And by seizing the throne, he prevented a possible civil war, which Aethelflaed would have been too weak to prevent. Meanwhile, Brida, broken by the death of her daughter, starts questioning her faith, as well as the faith of Father Pyrlig. She attempts to bargain with him to restore her daughter in exchange for the lives of her remaining followers, but Pyrlig tells her that God cannot trade lives. Brida's followers, seeing her lose her mind, abandon her. But talking with Father Pyrlig, she is able to calm down, and she is finally able to bury her daughter. She also allows Father Pyrlig to return to Wessex. But Father Pyrlig, seeing her lost, is able to convince her to come to Wessex with him, assuring her that Edward doesn't want to kill Danes. Back in Eoferwic, Sigtryggr is quite conflicted about how to deal with his brother's betrayal. Seeing him this way, Stiorra offers him a solution, and they tell Rognvaldr that he has two options: he can either choose a quick death, or he can seek redemption under Dane law. Rognvaldr chooses redemption. Thus he is made to lift a hot bar of metal with his bare hands, and has to walk 9 steps without dropping it. And now if he survives the infections and his burns are healed, it will mean that the gods have forgiven him. Sigtryggr agonizes over his brother's punishment, and Stiorra insists that he must not show weakness. Rognvaldr's hands begin to heal, but Sigtryggr, still feeling hurt by his actions, keeps his distance from him. Sigtryggr, getting to know about Edward's advances in Mercia, and how he took the throne by force, feels that he might attack them next. While back in Winchester, the Queen, feeling alone, seeks solace in her faith. And in order to be closer to God, she decides to travel to Lindisfarne, with a Christian visionary named Ollys. The Queen, knowing that a public visit to Lindisfarne might upset her father as well as the king, decides to go there in secret. In Aylesbury, Lord Aethelhelm is quite furious with how the king outmaneuvered him. But he was not done. He comes up with a new plan, and wants the Saxons to go to war with the Danes, hoping that in the war, the king will fall, the Danes will be defeated, and thereby, the throne will be open for his grandson. Thus he sends his men to kill the Christian visionary Ollys, and make sure that the blame falls on the Danes. His men attack the pilgrims, but the Queen, in order to save Ollys, assumes her identity, and the men kill her, not knowing that she is the Queen. They leave Ollys alive, so that she could spread the word that it was the men under Sigtryggr who attacked them. But before the word could spread, Hessen finds her, and knowing that the woman who was killed is the Queen. He knows that once this gets out, a war will break out between the Saxons and the Danes, and he doesn't want that. Thus, he gets the bodies concealed, and takes the Queen, as well as Ollys with him. He takes the body of the Queen to Rumcofa, where Uhtred has returned, and he shows him the body, and tells him what he learned from Ollys. Getting to know this, Uhtred knows that there is no way Sigtryggr would go after the Queen. He also knows that if he is not able to resolve this, it will mean a war. Thus he goes with Hessen to talk with Ollys. But first, he will go to Eoferwic, so that Sigtryggr could denounce his involvement in the act, while he sends Athelstan to keep an eye on his father. We also get to see Lady Aelswith and Aethelflaed taking shelter in Buxton. Lady Aelswith tells Aethelflaed that she plans to marry him with Sinlaf, one of Uhtred's men, whom Aethelflaed is fond of, as she believes if Aethelflaed marries a commoner, she cannot be perceived as a threat or used for political gains. Edith also reaches Buxton, and informs Lady Aelswith that they are in danger, as someone is trying to find them. Lord Aethelhelm, tired of waiting for the news to reach the king, goes to him and tells him that he heard from his sources that the visionary Ollys was killed by Sigtryggr's men, not knowing that it was not the visionary, but in fact his daughter whom he got killed. Edward knows that if this is true, it will mean that the peace between them and the Danes is over, but he does not want to rush into a war. And seeing his father-in-law desperate for him to attack, he sends him away to assure the King of Scotland that the peace deal between them still stands. Lord Aethelhelm, not being able to make Edward attack, now plans to provoke the Danes, and for the same, he sends his men to Rumcofa to slaughter the Danes living there. Uhtred informs Sigtryggr about the Queen's death. Sigtryggr lets him know that he had nothing to do with it. And they believe it was Edward himself who did this, so that he can have a reason to go to war with them. Uhtred assures them that this is not the case, and he lets them know that he will tell Edward that they were not involved in the Queen's death. And he leaves to talk with Ollies to know what exactly happened. Lord Aethelhelm's men attack Rumcofa in the name of the king, and they find the Queen's body there. Finan and Osferth try their best to fight off the men, but they are not able to prevent the Danes from being slaughtered, and in the process, Osferth also loses his life. The survivors from Rumcofa, knowing that the Saxon land is no longer safe for Danes, reach Eoferwic. Sigtryggr, seeing them, and knowing about Queen's death, thinks that Edward is responsible for everything, and he will now be attacking them. Sigtryggr, not willing to wait for him to attack, leaves with his men to confront Edward. On the other hand, Edward, seeing the Queen's body, also marches with his army towards Eoferwic. While he sends Athelstan to go to Queen's father and get him to return back. Uhtred, talking with Ollies, learns that the Queen was not the target of the attack and was killed as he took her place. As he makes his way back, he meets with Finan on the way, and he learns about the massacre of Rumcofa, and realizing that the men who attacked them initially blamed the Danes for killing the visionary, he was able to deduce that it is Lord Aethelhelm who is indeed responsible for everything. Thanks for watching. And if you liked it, please subscribe.